The boy on the bench. The sun was just beginning to set, casting a golden hue over the quiet suburban streets. Officer Mike Sorensen cruised slowly through the neighborhood, the warm breeze filling his patrol car as he passed families enjoying the late afternoon. Children laughed and played in front yards, while parents chatted, the soft hum of daily life washing over him. It was a peaceful day, one of those rare moments when nothing seemed out of place. But as he approached the small park in the center of town, something caught his attention. On a bench, far removed from the bustling activity around him, sat a lone boy. He couldn't have been more than 8 years old, his small frame slouched, his clothes dirty and rumpled. His eyes, though young, held an unnerving sense of weariness. Mike's instincts, honed through years of policing, kicked in immediately. This boy wasn't just sitting there to enjoy the evening air. Something was wrong. He pulled his patrol car over to the curb and stepped out, making his way towards the boy. As he approached, the boy's eyes lifted, meeting his with a mix of fear and hope. Mike crouched down to the boy's level, his tone soft and reassuring. "Hey there, buddy. I'm Officer Mike. You doing okay?" The boy didn't respond right away, only watching him with wide, cautious eyes. He was thin, his face pale, and his hands trembling slightly. Mike's heart ached. He had seen enough neglected and abandoned children in his line of work to recognize the signs. "What's your name?" Mike asked, his voice gentle. After a long pause, the boy whispered, "Sam." Mike smiled, though concern tugged at him. "Nice to meet you, Sam. Are you here alone? Where are your parents?" At the mention of parents, Sam's face crumpled, his eyes filling with tears. He reached into the pocket of his jacket and pulled out a crumpled photograph, holding it out to Mike with trembling hands. Mike took the picture carefully, smoothing it out with his fingers. It was a family portrait. A man, a woman, and a young Sam, all smiling brightly at the camera. "This is your family?" Mike asked softly. Sam nodded, a single tear slipping down his cheek. "I can't find them," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Mike's heart twisted. He examined the photograph closely, hoping to find some clue that would help reunite this boy with his family. But as his eyes drifted to the background of the image, something made his blood run cold. In the shadowed corner of the picture, partially hidden but unmistakable, was the face of a man Mike recognized all too well, Daniel Willows. A notorious criminal who had evaded the law for years, Willows had been the subject of countless manhunts, always slipping through the cracks. Why was Willows in this photograph? What was his connection to Sam's family? Mike's mind raced. The situation had just escalated from a simple missing persons case to something far more dangerous. "Sam," Mike said gently, keeping his tone calm despite the growing tension in his chest, "can you tell me more about your parents? When was the last time you saw them?" Sam's lip quivered. "My mom. She's gone," he said quietly. "I don't know where my dad is. I've been looking for him." Mike's heart ached. This little boy, alone in the world, had been searching for his father, possibly a man connected to a dangerous criminal. The thought made Mike's stomach churn. He couldn't let this boy face whatever danger might be lurking alone. Reaching for his radio, Mike called it in. "This is Officer Mike. I need backup at Riverside Park. Lost child situation. Possible connection to a high-priority suspect." As he tucked the radio away, he placed a reassuring hand on Sam's shoulder. "Don't worry, Sam. You're safe now. We're going to figure this out together." Sam looked up at him, his brown eyes filled with a glimmer of hope. "Really?" Mike nodded. "Really? You're not alone anymore." Just as Mike finished speaking, the distant sound of sirens began to fill the air. Backup was on its way, but Mike couldn't shake the uneasy feeling creeping into his gut. There was something about this situation, something about Daniel Willows and this family, that didn't add up. Whatever the truth was, Mike was determined to get to the bottom of it, for Sam's sake. He looked down at the boy again, feeling an overwhelming sense of protectiveness. He had seen too many children like Sam fall through the cracks, abandoned by the system and forgotten by the world. But not this time. Not this boy. Sam had been through enough, and Mike was going to make sure that whatever happened next, he wouldn't have to face it alone. As the police cars pulled up, their lights flashing, Officer Mike stood up, ready to face whatever came next. But deep down, he knew this was just the beginning of something much bigger. The unfolding mystery. The quiet hum of the police station buzzed with a calm intensity as Officer Mike and his colleagues worked late into the evening. After they had brought Sam back to the station, Mike had made sure the boy was settled comfortably in one of the back rooms where they usually brought children who needed to be looked after. He had been given snacks and a few coloring books, but the boy sat quietly, holding that family photo tightly in his hands, as though it were the last connection he had to the people who mattered most to him. Mike couldn't shake the strange feeling in his gut. There was something deeply unsettling about the entire situation. Daniel Willows, a man he had spent years chasing in connection to a string of crimes, was in that photograph. What was even more unnerving was how Sam looked at the photo with nothing but love in his eyes. There was no fear, no suspicion. How could this innocent little boy be connected to a man like Willows? Officer Johnson, Mike's seasoned partner with graying hair and a weathered face, came into the room. He glanced toward Sam through the one-way window. The boy was still sitting quietly, clutching the picture. Johnson folded his arms across his chest, his brow furrowed. "You really think the kid's dad could be Willows?" Johnson asked, his voice low and gruff, but tinged with concern. Mike nodded, rubbing the back of his neck. "I don't know, but it's a strong possibility. The man in the background of the photo looks exactly like him. The resemblance is too strong to ignore." Johnson sighed, shaking his head. "Willows was smart, real smart. If this kid is related to him, we're looking at a much more complicated situation than we thought. But I don't get it. Why would a man like that allow his picture to be taken with this kid's family? Especially if he's still on the run." "That's what's bothering me," Mike admitted. "I don't think Willows would have been careless enough to leave such a clue unless there's more to this story than we know." Johnson gave a slow nod. "We'll run a background check on Sam's family, see if we can trace anything. Maybe the father used an alias, or maybe we're dealing with someone who just looks like Willows. Either way, we need answers." As Johnson left to run the checks, Mike stood and headed back into the room where Sam sat. The boy looked up as Mike entered, his eyes filled with an uncertain hope. Mike sat across from him, trying his best to offer a warm smile despite the weight of the situation pressing down on him. "Hey, buddy," Mike said softly. "I know this must all be really scary for you, but I want you to know we're doing everything we can to help." Sam didn't say anything at first. He just looked at the photo in his hands, his fingers tracing the edges of the paper. Finally, he whispered, "Are you going to help me find my dad?" Mike swallowed hard. He wanted to tell the boy everything would be okay, but he couldn't make promises he wasn't sure he could keep. Instead, he leaned forward and said, "We're going to do everything we can to find out what happened, Sam. I promise." Sam nodded, though the sadness in his eyes remained. Mike could tell the boy had been through more than any child should ever have to endure. He had seen that look before in other kids who had been abandoned, neglected, or had lost the people they loved most in the world. It broke Mike's heart every time. "What can you tell me about your dad?" Mike asked gently. "I know it's hard, but anything you can remember might help." Sam bit his lip, his small fingers clutching the photo tighter. "My dad, he was always busy," Sam said quietly, his voice small. "He was gone a lot. Mom said it was because he had a very important job. She didn't tell me what, but she always said that he loved me." Mike listened intently, every detail sharpening the puzzle in his mind. If Sam's father really was Daniel Willows, then it was clear why the man had to be gone so often. He was hiding, running from the law. But the way Sam spoke about him was confusing. Could a man like Willows really have a son and still continue his criminal activities? Sam continued, his voice shaky. He used to bring me presents when he came home. Cool stuff, like toy cars and action figures. Mom would get mad sometimes because she said he was trying to make up for not being around. But I didn't care. I was just happy to see him. Mike's chest tightened. Sam's memories painted the picture of a loving, though absent, father, one that didn't match the profile of a hardened criminal like Daniel Willows. Something about this story just didn't sit right. Do you remember when the last time you saw him was? Mike asked, his voice gentle. Sam nodded slowly. It was a long time ago. We were at a park, me, Mom, and Dad. We were going to have a picnic, but Sam trailed off, his brows furrowing, as though he was trying to remember something that didn't make sense. Dad got a phone call. He left in a hurry. Mom tried to follow him, but we never saw him again. Mike sat back, digesting Sam's words. It sounded like Sam's father had left them suddenly, disappearing without a trace. If that man really was Daniel Willows, then his hasty exit might have been because the authorities were closing in on him. Before Mike could ask more, Officer Johnson entered the room with a file in his hand. He gave Mike a pointed look, indicating they needed to talk. Mike stood up and patted Sam's shoulder reassuringly. I'll be right back, Sam. Okay. Sam nodded quietly, returning his focus to the crumpled photo. Mike joined Johnson outside the room, where the older officer handed him the file. You're going to want to take a look at this. Mike opened the folder and scanned the documents inside. His eyes widened as he read through the report. What the? This can't be right. Johnson crossed his arms. It's right. I had them run checks on every known alias and connection Daniel Willows had. The man in the photo isn't just someone who looks like him. It's definitely Willows. But here's where things get strange. Johnson pointed to a page in the file, and Mike's blood ran cold. Willows had been declared dead. According to this, Johnson said grimly, Daniel Willows died in a car accident 3 years ago, along with his wife. The wreck was so bad they could only confirm his identity through dental records. Mike's mind reeled. If Willows had died 3 years ago, then who had been raising Sam all this time? And if the man in the photograph was truly Willows, how could he have been declared dead? There's more, Johnson added, lowering his voice. After the accident, Sam was placed in foster care for a while. He was eventually adopted by a family, but a few months later, he ran away. He's been missing for almost a year now. Mike felt a wave of nausea wash over him. Everything was far more complicated than he had imagined. Sam was not just a lost boy looking for his family. He was a boy with a connection to a man long believed to be dead. What do we do now? Mike asked, feeling the weight of the situation grow heavier by the second. Johnson gave him a hard look. We dig deeper. Something's not adding up here. And if Daniel Willows isn't dead, we need to find out what's really going on. As Mike processed the information, his gaze drifted back to the small boy in the other room, his heart heavy with the knowledge that the answers they were looking for could change everything, for Sam and for them. The secret in the shadows. As the hours ticked by, the tension in the station grew thicker. Officer Mike Sorensen sat at his desk, sifting through a mountain of case files. The dim light overhead flickered slightly, casting long shadows across the room. The entire department was now invested in solving the mystery that surrounded Sam, his missing father, and the man who may or may not have been Daniel Willows, the same man who had been declared dead 3 years ago. Yet, the deeper Mike and his colleagues dug, the more unsettling the case became. Sam remained in the small, child-friendly room where Mike had left him earlier. Every so often, Mike would peek through the window, watching the boy as he flipped through a coloring book absent-mindedly. His small hand still clutched the crumpled photograph of his family, a family that now seemed like a ghost haunting the edges of their investigation. Mike felt a gnawing sense of urgency, but also confusion. How could Daniel Willows, one of the most notorious criminals in the region, have vanished without a trace only to resurface in a family photo years later. And even more perplexing, why did Sam believe his father was still alive when all official records indicated otherwise? "Mike," a voice called out, snapping him from his thoughts. It was Officer Johnson, his partner and mentor for many years. Johnson had been working tirelessly to uncover any trace of information that might lead them to the truth about Sam's family. In his hand was a stack of old records, yellowed with age. He tossed them onto Mike's desk with a sigh. "These are from the last manhunt for Willows," Johnson said, running a hand over his tired face. "The final investigation before his supposed death. I don't know what to make of this, but there are some discrepancies that don't sit right with me." Mike leaned forward, flipping open one of the files. As he scanned the reports, his brow furrowed. The last known sighting of Willows had been during a high-speed chase that ended in a car wreck along a desolate highway. The official report claimed that Willows, his wife, and a young woman, believed to be an associate, had all died in the crash. But something was off. Mike had dealt with countless accident reports over the years, and this one seemed rushed, incomplete. The details were vague. The witness statements short and inconclusive. "Look at this," Mike said, pointing to a section in one of the reports. The coroner's office marked Daniel Willow's body as unidentifiable, except for dental records. "That's pretty convenient, isn't it?" Johnson nodded slowly. "Exactly what I was thinking. And get this, the woman they assumed was his wife. Her identity was never officially confirmed. No one from her side of the family came forward to claim the body." Mike's mind raced as the pieces started to fall into place. It wasn't just that the investigation was sloppy. It was as if someone wanted it closed, quickly. If Willows hadn't actually died in that crash, it meant the authorities had been deceived, and worse yet, he might still be alive somewhere. But why fake his death? Mike muttered, more to himself than to Johnson. Why leave Sam and his wife behind? Before he could spiral further into theories, there was a knock at the door. It was Officer Linda, one of the newer recruits, her face pale and anxious. "Mike, you need to see this. We ran a deeper search on the Willows case, and something came up." Mike and Johnson exchanged glances before following Linda down the hall to the small tech room. The walls were lined with monitors, all displaying various files and video feeds from past investigations. Linda pulled up an old surveillance video, pausing it on a grainy frame of a man standing outside a convenience store. "This footage is from 2 years ago," Linda explained, pointing to the figure. "It was taken 3 states over, and at the time, no one connected it to Willows because, well, he was supposed to be dead." Mike squinted at the screen. The man in the video was wearing a hooded jacket, his face partially obscured, but there was something eerily familiar about him. Something in the way he stood, the shape of his jaw. Linda fast-forwarded the tape, and suddenly, the man turned his head just enough for the camera to capture his face. Mike's heart leaped into his throat. It was him, Daniel Willows. The same man who had supposedly died in a fiery car crash was standing alive and well in this footage, almost a year after his reported death. "I pulled all the records from that area during the time of this video," Linda continued, clicking through more files on the screen. "There were no significant crimes linked to him, but it's strange. He just disappeared after this, like a ghost. No further sightings." Mike stared at the screen, his thoughts swirling. If Willows was still alive, it meant Sam's belief in his father's survival wasn't just wishful thinking. But why would Willows vanish? Was he hiding from the law, or was there something more dangerous at play? "What about Sam's mom?" Mike asked, turning to Linda. "Anything on her?" Linda shook her head. "Nothing. It's like she vanished off the face of the earth too. No social media, no credit card activity, nothing." Mike ran a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of the situation pressing down on him. "So we've got a dead man walking, no sign of the mother, and a boy who's been on his own for who knows how long." Johnson, who had been silent until now, finally spoke up. "Mike, what if Willows didn't abandon his family? What if someone else is pulling the strings here? Think about it. If Willows faked his death, maybe he did it to protect them. Maybe there's someone else involved in this who's more dangerous than we realize. Mike frowned, considering the possibility. It was a far-fetched theory, but given everything they'd uncovered, it wasn't impossible. If Willows had gone into hiding, it was likely because he feared for his life, and possibly the lives of his family. Just then, a call came in over the station intercom. It was from the front desk. "Officer Mike, we got a visitor here asking for you. He says it's urgent." Mike raised an eyebrow. "A visitor? At this hour?" The voice on the other end hesitated before adding, "Yeah, says his name is Daniel Willows." Mike's blood ran cold. Johnson looked at him sharply, his eyes wide with disbelief. Without another word, Mike bolted from the room, his heart pounding in his chest. Could it really be him? He rushed down the hallway, his footsteps echoing off the cold tile floors, and skidded to a stop just outside the reception area. There, standing in the shadows by the door, was a man, tall, lean, and cloaked in a dark trench coat. His face was partially obscured by the brim of a hat, but even from a distance, Mike could feel the tension radiating from him. The man looked up, his eyes locking with Mike's. "Officer Sorensen?" he asked, his voice low and gravelly. Mike swallowed hard, nodding slowly. "That's me." The man took a step forward, finally revealing his face in the dim light. There was no mistaking it. Standing before him was the ghost he'd been chasing for years. Daniel Willows, a ghost from the past. The weight of the moment hit Officer Mike Sorensen like a wave. Daniel Willows, the man who had supposedly died in a fiery car wreck, stood before him, very much alive. The dim light in the police station's lobby flickered ominously, casting long shadows that danced across the walls. Mike's heart pounded in his chest, his mind racing to make sense of what was happening. How could this man, this notorious criminal, be standing here after all these years? And why now? The tension between the two men was palpable. Mike swallowed hard, his hand instinctively moving toward his radio, though he hesitated to use it. Something about Willow's demeanor wasn't what he expected. The man wasn't here to cause trouble. His face was marked by something else. Desperation, maybe even fear. "Willows," Mike said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "You've got some explaining to do." Willows didn't flinch. Instead, he stepped further into the light, his face finally fully illuminated. Time had weathered him. His once clean-shaven face was now framed by stubble, his eyes shadowed with fatigue. He wasn't the cocky criminal that Mike had chased for years. He looked like a man who had been running from something far more terrifying than the law. "I'm not here to cause problems," Willows said, his voice low and strained. "I'm here because of my son." Mike's heart clenched at the mention of Sam. Willows knew exactly what to say to make Mike listen, but Mike couldn't let his guard down. Not yet. He was still the man who had evaded capture for years, who had faked his death. And now, suddenly, he was back in the picture, claiming to care about his son. "Your son," Mike repeated, his voice hardening. "The same son who's been wandering the streets alone, searching for you." Willows flinched at Mike's words, guilt flashing across his face. "I know what it looks like, but it's not what you think. I didn't abandon Sam. I had no choice." Mike crossed his arms, narrowing his eyes. "You had no choice. You faked your death, left him to fend for himself, and you think that excuses everything." Willows exhaled sharply, his shoulders sagging. "You don't understand what's going on, officer. There's more to this than you know. I did what I had to do to keep him safe." Mike's skepticism deepened, but something in Willow's voice made him pause. The man wasn't just making excuses. He truly believed what he was saying. Still, Mike couldn't afford to trust him blindly. "Then why don't you start explaining?" Mike said coldly. "You owe Sam that much." Willows glanced around nervously, as if expecting someone to burst through the door at any moment. He stepped closer to Mike, lowering his voice. "This isn't the place. I can't risk talking here. Mike frowned. You're in a police station. If anyone's looking for you, this is the safest place to be. But Willows shook his head, his eyes wide with fear. You don't get it, Sorensen. The people I'm running from, they don't care about police stations. They don't care about the law. They'll come after me. And Sam, if they know I'm here. Mike hesitated. Whoever Willows was running from, it clearly wasn't just the authorities. There was something else at play, something bigger than either of them. As much as Mike wanted to bring Willows in for questioning, he couldn't shake the feeling that the man was telling the truth. All right, Mike said slowly, we'll go somewhere private, but don't think for a second that I'm letting you out of my sight. Willows nodded, his relief visible, though tension still gripped his features. Thank you. Mike motioned for Willows to follow him. They made their way through the station's back corridors, passing a few curious officers who eyed the man with suspicion. Johnson, who had been working in the tech room, spotted them and immediately moved to intercept. Mike, Johnson began, his eyes narrowing at Willows. What the hell is going on? Mike gestured for Johnson to follow. We need to talk. In private. The three men entered a small, dimly lit interrogation room. The atmosphere in the room was thick with unease as Willows sat down, running a hand through his disheveled hair. Johnson remained standing, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. I assume you've got answers, Johnson said, his tone sharp. Willows nodded, though he looked exhausted. I've been on the run for years, trying to protect Sam and his mother, but everything fell apart when they caught up with me. The accident, the one you think killed me, it was staged. Mike and Johnson exchanged glances, the pieces of the puzzle slowly beginning to come together. Willows continued. There's a group, very powerful people, who I got tangled up with a long time ago. It started with some minor jobs, but then I learned too much. By the time I realized how deep I was in, it was too late. They didn't want to kill me outright because they needed me for something big. So I faked my death to get away from them. Johnson narrowed his eyes. So you just left your family behind to save yourself? Willows shook his head vehemently. No, I tried to keep them safe. Sam's mom, she was supposed to take him and disappear, but something went wrong. I don't know what, but when I finally resurfaced to find them, they were gone. I've been looking for them ever since. Mike leaned forward. Sam's been alone for nearly a year. What happened to his mother? Willow's face twisted with anguish. I don't know. I found out she was taken by the same people who were after me. I think she tried to protect Sam, but they caught her. I've been tracking them, trying to figure out where they took her. Mike's stomach turned. Sam's mother had been taken by criminals, and the boy had been left to fend for himself. The thought filled him with anger. Anger at Willows for failing his family, and anger at the people who had torn them apart. We need names, Johnson said bluntly. Who are these people? If they got Sam's mother, we'll need to track them down. Willows shook his head again, his voice trembling. I can't. If I give you their names, they'll come after Sam. They don't leave loose ends. Mike slammed his hand on the table, frustration boiling over. They're already after Sam. He's been wandering the streets, scared and alone, for almost a year. If we don't stop them, they'll find him eventually. Don't you think he deserves to know the truth? Don't you think he deserves to be safe? Willows recoiled, his face pale. I know. I messed up, okay. But I'm trying to fix it. He choked on his words, running a trembling hand over his face. I just need time. Mike stood up, pacing the small room. Time was the one thing they didn't have. Whoever was hunting Willows wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted, and Sam was caught in the crossfire. Johnson cleared his throat. There's one thing we haven't talked about yet. If these people are as powerful as you say, why come here? Why risk exposing yourself now, after all this time? Willows glanced at the one-way window, his eyes full of fear and guilt. Because they're close. I can feel it. They've been tracking me, and I think they know about Sam. They'll come for him next." Mike stopped pacing, his heart dropping into his stomach. If Willows was right, then Sam was in more danger than they realized. They couldn't afford to wait any longer. "We're going to protect Sam," Mike said firmly, his eyes locking with Willow's. "But we need your full cooperation. No more half-truths, no more running. You need to tell us everything." Willows looked defeated, his shoulders slumping as he nodded. "I'll tell you everything. Just keep him safe, please." Mike exchanged a glance with Johnson, both men knowing that the road ahead was about to get much more dangerous. They had a boy to protect, a conspiracy to unravel, and a criminal network to dismantle. And time was running out. A deadly game unfolds. The air in the interrogation room was heavy with unspoken tension. Mike Sorensen leaned back against the wall, arms crossed, watching Daniel Willows, once the man at the center of one of the biggest criminal investigations the state had ever seen, now a hollowed-out shadow of his former self. The story Willows had told left a bitter taste in Mike's mouth, but he couldn't deny one thing. The man was scared. Not for himself, but for Sam. After what felt like an eternity, Willows finally spoke, breaking the silence. "They're not just after me anymore," Willows began, his voice strained. "It's Sam. They've figured out who he is. That's why I had to come here. They'd been getting closer every day, and I can't keep him safe on my own anymore." Mike exhaled, the weight of the situation sinking deeper into his bones. He could see the cracks in Willow's facade, the guilt, the fear, the regret. This was no longer a criminal mastermind playing the game of cat and mouse with the law. This was a father, broken and desperate, trying to protect the only thing that still mattered to him. But even now, Mike couldn't fully shake his suspicion. "You say these people are after Sam," Mike said carefully. "But why now? Why not take him when they had the chance a year ago when you disappeared? Why did they wait?" Willows ran a hand through his unkempt hair, his eyes bloodshot and tired. "Because they didn't know. Sam's mother and we thought we could hide him. We changed our names, moved constantly, tried to erase every trace of our past. I thought we could stay ahead of them, but—" His voice trailed off, the words choking in his throat. "They found her. They found his mom." Mike felt a cold knot form in his stomach. "You said earlier that they took her. Are you telling me they still have her?" Willows nodded, his face a mask of anguish. "She's alive, but they're using her to get to me. They think I know something. Information I never had, but they believe I do. And now they're using Sam as leverage to flush me out." Officer Johnson, who had been silent until now, finally spoke, his gruff voice filled with skepticism. "Why should we believe any of this? For all we know, you could still be playing us, trying to manipulate the situation like you always did." Willow's expression darkened, his fists clenching on the table. "I don't care what you believe. All I care about is keeping my son safe. You think I wanted this. You think I wanted to live like a ghost, never knowing if the next day would be my last." Mike stepped forward, cutting through the tension. "Look, none of this matters unless we find out who these people are and how they plan to come after Sam. Willows, if we're going to help you, we need details. Every name, every location, everything you know." Willows looked up, the shadows under his eyes deepening. "They're part of an international network, a group that deals in everything from black market weapons to high-level corporate espionage. They don't work like a typical criminal organization. There are no ranks, no clear leaders. But there's one name that always comes up when you're deep enough in their world. The broker." Mike frowned. "The broker?" Willows nodded. "That's the name everyone whispers about. No one's ever seen him, but he's the one pulling the strings. He makes deals, facilitates transactions between the world's most dangerous people, and if you cross him, you disappear. That's what happened to me. I stumbled onto one of their deals, a deal I was never supposed to know about. I tried to walk away, but they couldn't let me. Johnson let out a low whistle. So you faked your death to get out of their reach. But you couldn't disappear forever, could you? Willows gave a bitter smile. No, they're relentless. It was only a matter of time before they found me again. That's why I came back, to try and finish this once and for all. But now they're after Sam. They know he's the key to getting to me, and they won't stop until they have him. Mike felt the walls closing in. The situation was far more dangerous than he had initially realized. This wasn't just about protecting Sam from a few criminals on the run. This was about outmaneuvering a powerful and shadowy organization that could strike at any moment. We're going to need more than just a name, Mike said, his voice firm. If the broker is involved, we need to figure out where they're operating from. Do you have any leads, any idea where they might be keeping Sam's mother? Willows hesitated, his eyes darting nervously toward the door. I've been tracking their movements for months. There's a safe house just outside the city. They use it as a hub for their operations. I'm almost certain they've got her there. Mike and Johnson exchanged a glance. If what Willows was saying was true, they had to act fast. If Sam's mother was alive, she might be their only leverage in keeping Sam safe and bringing down this organization. Johnson leaned in, his face stern. All right, let's say we believe you. Let's say we go after this safe house. What happens next? Do we go in guns blazing and hope to catch the broker, or is there another way to bring these people down? Willow's face hardened. You can't bring them down by force. That's not how this works. They have eyes everywhere. If you go after them head-on, they'll disappear, and you'll never see them again. You'll lose Sam's mom, and they'll come after the boy harder than ever before. Then what do we do? Mike asked, frustration creeping into his voice. We can't just sit here and wait for them to strike. Willows paused, his jaw clenching. You have to draw them out. Make them believe they're still in control. Let them think I'm giving them what they want. Johnson's brow furrowed. What exactly do they want from you? Willows met his gaze, his voice low and tense. They want information about a deal I stumbled on years ago. A deal involving high-level government contracts and corrupt officials. It's not just about money. It's about power. They think I have the last piece of the puzzle that could expose them. But the truth is, I never had it. It was all a lie. Mike shook his head, frustration boiling over. So we're dealing with a ghost story. You don't have what they want, but they'll still come after you. How do we stop this? Willows leaned forward, his eyes burning with intensity. We give them what they want. We stage a meeting, make them believe I'm handing over the information. Once they're out in the open, you can move in. Mike wasn't convinced. The plan was too risky, too many moving parts, too many ways it could go wrong. But what choice did they have? If they didn't act soon, Sam and his mother would both be lost. How do we know they'll show up? Johnson asked, his voice filled with doubt. Willows gave a grim smile. They'll show up. Trust me, when it comes to their survival, they'll take the bait. They'll do whatever it takes to keep their secrets buried. Mike stood up, pacing the room. His mind raced with possibilities, but none of them felt certain. This wasn't just about taking down a group of criminals. It was about saving a family, protecting a boy who had already lost too much. All right, Mike said finally, his voice resolute. We'll set the trap. But know this, Willows, if anything goes wrong, if you're playing us, I will make sure you never see Sam again. Willows nodded, his face solemn. I'm not playing anyone, officer. I just want my son to be safe. That's all I've ever wanted. As Mike and Johnson began to make plans for the operation, a sense of foreboding settled over the room. They were about to step into a deadly game, one where the stakes couldn't be higher. And in this game, there would be no second chances. The final reckoning. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the abandoned warehouse district where Officer Mike Sorensen and his team had set up their trap. The night air was thick with tension, the kind that made every sound seem louder, every movement more significant. The plan was in motion, and now all they could do was wait for the inevitable clash between the law and the shadowy forces that had been hunting Daniel Willows and his son Sam. Mike stood near the entrance to the warehouse, his radio crackling softly in his ear. Around him, his team was positioned in strategic locations, hidden from sight but ready to spring into action the moment things went sideways. Officer Johnson, always a steady presence, was crouched behind a stack of crates, his sharp eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. The plan was risky, dangerous even, but it was the only way. Willows had agreed to play his part, to act as bait in a carefully orchestrated setup designed to draw out the broker and his deadly network. Mike had mixed feelings about trusting Willows. The man had spent years running from the law, hiding in the shadows, and yet now he was putting his life on the line for his son. It was hard to reconcile the criminal with the father, but one thing was certain. Willow's desperation was real, and if the plan worked, it might be the only chance they had to save Sam's mother. The safe house where Sam's mother was supposedly being held was located just outside the city, a remote and heavily secured property owned by a shell corporation tied to the broker's network. But Willows had insisted that they needed more than brute force to get her out. They needed leverage. That was why they were here, preparing to meet with the broker's people, hoping to use Willows as the key to cracking open the organization. Mike's radio crackled again, this time with Johnson's voice. "You sure about this, Mike? This could go south real fast." Mike pressed the earpiece closer, his eyes scanning the perimeter. "I'm not sure about anything anymore, Johnson, but we don't have a choice. If we don't flush them out tonight, Sam and his mother are as good as gone." Johnson grunted in response. "Let's just hope Willows plays it straight. I don't like dealing with ghosts." Mike's thoughts drifted to Sam, who was safely hidden away at the station under the watchful eye of Officer Linda. The boy had been through more in his short life than most adults could handle, and now he was caught in the crossfire of a war he didn't even understand. Mike had promised him they would find his mother, and he intended to keep that promise. In the distance, the sound of tires crunching over gravel reached Mike's ears. He tensed, signaling to the team. Moments later, a sleek black SUV emerged from the shadows, its headlights cutting through the darkness as it pulled up to the warehouse. The engine cut off, and for a moment, all was still. The door to the SUV opened, and two men stepped out, both dressed in dark, expensive suits. Their movements were precise, calculated, as if they were used to navigating dangerous territory. One of the men was tall and lean, with a face that seemed permanently etched in stone, while the other was shorter, stockier, and carried himself with the confidence of a man who had seen his share of violence. But it was the third figure that stepped out of the SUV that sent a shiver down Mike's spine. He had heard rumors about the broker, stories passed around in hushed tones by criminals and informants alike. But seeing him in person was something else entirely. The man was older than Mike had expected, with silver hair neatly combed back and sharp, calculating eyes that seemed to miss nothing. His presence was commanding, his expression cold and emotionless. This was the man pulling the strings, the man who had turned Daniel Willows' life into a living nightmare. Willows, standing by the warehouse entrance, stepped forward to greet the group, his face carefully neutral. Mike watched from his position behind a row of rusted machinery, his heart pounding in his chest. Everything hinged on this moment. If the broker suspected even for a second that they were walking into a trap, the operation would be over before it began. The tall man approached Willows first, eyeing him with thinly veiled contempt. "You've been a hard man to find, Willows. I have to admit, I'm impressed you had the guts to show up tonight." Willows didn't flinch, his voice steady. "I'm not here to play games. You want the information. I want my son and his mother safe. This ends tonight." The broker, standing a few paces behind his men, gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "And why should I believe you have anything worth my time, Willows? You've been running from us for years, and now suddenly you're ready to make a deal." Willows met the broker's gaze, his voice low and controlled. "Because you know I'm the only one who can give you what you want, I've kept my head down for a reason. I know things that could destroy you and your entire operation." A tense silence followed Willow's words. Mike's hand hovered over his radio, ready to give the signal if things went wrong. He could feel the weight of the moment, the fragile balance between success and catastrophe. The broker took a step forward, his eyes narrowing. "And what makes you think I won't kill you the second you hand over that information?" Willows smiled grimly. "Because if I don't make it out of here alive, the files I've collected over the years will be released to every major news outlet in the world. I've taken precautions, broker. You're not dealing with a fool." For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed the broker's face. He was calculating, weighing his options. Finally, he nodded to his men. "Bring the woman." Mike's heart raced as the two men opened the back of the SUV, pulling out a figure that had been hidden in the shadows. Sam's mother, her wrists bound and her face pale, stumbled as they pushed her forward. She was thin, her clothes dirty, but her eyes were defiant, even in the face of her captors. Willow's breath hitched as he saw her, but he remained composed. Mike could feel the tension rising. The exchange was about to happen, and everything had to go perfectly. Just as Willow stepped forward to take his wife's hand, the sound of gunfire erupted from the far end of the warehouse. Chaos ensued. "Go! Go! Go!" Mike shouted into his radio as officers swarmed out of their positions, weapons drawn. The warehouse exploded into action, shouts and gunfire ringing out as the broker's men scrambled for cover. Willows pulled his wife behind a stack of crates, shielding her from the gunfire. Mike and Johnson moved in from opposite sides, their guns trained on the broker's position. But the broker, calm and collected even in the chaos, had already anticipated the ambush. With a swift motion, the broker ducked behind the SUV, his men firing back at the officers as they retreated. Mike cursed under his breath. The man was slippery, just like every criminal mastermind he'd ever come across. "Johnson, flank left." Mike shouted, his mind racing as he tried to keep track of the moving targets. He could see the broker making a break for one of the side exits, slipping through the chaos like a ghost. As Mike advanced, he saw Willows huddled with his wife, his face a mix of fear and determination. "Get her out of here," Mike ordered. "We'll handle the broker." Willows hesitated for a moment, his eyes locking with Mike's. There was gratitude there, but also something else, something Mike couldn't quite place. With a nod, Willows took his wife by the arm and led her toward the safety of the back exit, disappearing into the night. Meanwhile, Mike and Johnson pursued the broker through the maze of crates and machinery, the echo of gunfire bouncing off the walls. The broker was fast, but Mike was faster. He sprinted forward, his heart pounding as he closed the gap. Finally, the broker reached the exit, only to find himself cornered. Mike and Johnson stood a few feet away, their guns drawn, ready to bring this deadly game to an end. "It's over," Mike said, his voice steady but filled with resolve. "There's nowhere left to run." The broker, breathing heavily, glanced between them, his eyes calculating his options. For a moment, it seemed like he might surrender. But then, with a defiant smirk, he reached into his coat pocket. "Don't," Mike shouted. Before the broker could make his move, Johnson fired, the sound of the gunshot echoing through the night. The broker stumbled, clutching his side as he collapsed against the wall, blood pooling beneath him. Mike approached cautiously, his gun still trained on the man. But it was clear the broker wasn't going to fight anymore. He was done. As the broker's breathing slowed, he looked up at Mike, his face pale and his eyes losing their sharpness. "You think this ends with me?" he rasped. "There's always another one. You can't stop what's coming." Mike knelt down beside him, his face grim. "We'll see about that." With that, the broker took his final breath, his body slumping against the cold concrete floor. The operation was over. Hours later, Mike sat in the station, watching as Sam was reunited with his mother. The boy's eyes lit up as she pulled him into a tight embrace, tears streaming down her face. It was a scene of relief, of hope, something Mike hadn't been sure they would see when this all began. Willows stood off to the side, his expression one of quiet exhaustion. He had lost so much over the years, but in this moment, he had his family back. That was all that mattered. As Mike walked over to Willows, the man gave him a weary smile. "I didn't think we'd make it out of this alive," Willows said quietly. Mike nodded, his eyes softening. "Neither did I. But you did the right thing, Willows. You gave Sam a chance." Willows looked over at his son, his face filled with a mixture of sadness and relief. "Maybe now, we can start over." Mike placed a hand on his shoulder. "Take care of them. You've got a second chance. Don't waste it." Willows nodded, his eyes wet with unshed tears. "I won't." As Mike turned to leave, he glanced back one last time at the reunited family. The road ahead wouldn't be easy for them, but they had made it through the storm. And for now, that was enough.